Great. So yeah, my name's Kevin Holman. I think a lot of people who've been in SCOM for a decent period of time know who I am. I've been a contributor to the community pretty much ever since I joined Microsoft about 17 years ago, and it's been a long, fun ride. I don't think anybody in IT ever gets to do the same thing for 17 years, but I've been super, super fortunate. I was just talking with a customer the other day about how in SCOM you learn something every single day, and I got taught something by a customer just this morning, and then watching that session, I had no idea all of that capability was available in Copilot. That was really cool. So yeah, you never stop learning with this product, that's for sure. All right, so my session today is going to cover keeping SCOM healthy. I manage a team at Microsoft of SCOM engineers, and I still do a lot of direct customer work as well. And we just had a lot of SCOM 2012 conversions to 2019 and 2022. We because SCOM 2012 just expired, a lot of companies were kind of way behind and still had those instances around. And so one of the offerings that we have at Microsoft is a side-by-side migration offering to help customers get off of the old and onto the new. And so sometimes, they may go to an older version. Some customers opt for 2019 just due to what they need to monitor and compatibility. But most of our deployments are 2022. And what I found is, and then the other thing that we get a lot of requests for is health assessments, right? We have through unified support, you can do your own health assessment, or you can ask for a guided health assessment with a Microsoft engineer. And so when we do those assessments and we do these migrations, what I've found is some of the most common issues that are well known, fairly well documented. We're still seeing a lot of that in the field, and so I just kind of thought this would be relevant for people to be able to check their own environments. The other side of that is people move on. People go into different careers and different directions in IT, and so we have a lot of customers that have recently inherited SCOM and they're new to the product and they don't know to look for these things that have been well-known issues for many years. So I thought it relevant to just kind of talk about some of those, and then what are some of the best practices that help us avoid pitfalls, and then tools to monitor for them. So I am going to release a management pack that focuses on SCOM health at the end of this, and I'll do a short demo on that management pack as well. And it's something that I think we'll see grow through, when I get more ideas and customers request more. But some of my customers, my direct customers, have been running this management pack for years, and I've just never made it public. So with that, yeah, let's get started. So the first thing I want to talk about is the SCOM data collector. The SCOM data collector, if you open a support case with Microsoft, 9 times out of 10, they're going to ask you to run this tool. It's not just a tool for Microsoft. There's nothing that keeps you from running it yourself for your own benefit. What it basically does is it's a PowerShell script. I wrote it years ago, and when I wrote it, it was just collecting SQL queries for things that I needed on a regular basis from all of my customers. And Blake Drum took it, and he's a support engineer. He took it and put it on steroids, and now it collects SQL queries, event logs, a bunch of generic information about the environment. And it's really helpful because if someone gives me a SCOM data collector dump, I can pretty much figure out all the things that are going on in that customer's environment and everything that, what level of maturity they're at, where we need to focus on remediation. And so what I'm going to show you today may give you some tips on how you can use it as well to keep your environment healthy, tuned, and optimized. So with that, I'm just going to give an example. You can download it at aka.ms SCOM data collector yourself. And so you just run it through PowerShell. So you'll download that zip file, extract it out, and then we'll just call the data collector. And it's going to ask some permissions. Do you want, like if you're running this as a low level user, you can say, well, go ahead and run it as the SDK account. You'll need to know the SDK password. I don't want to do that. I prefer to run it as myself. We want to gather as much information as possible. And we just want to continue and start the script. So it's going to prompt me, are you sure you have permissions to the SQL database? Yes, I have the permissions. So if you run this on a management server, it's going to go get the SQL servers and collect that information about them from the registry, about where your databases are, what servers they are, what the connect strings are, and it will start running these queries. And ultimately, it'll dump them into a bunch of CSV files. When it's completely finished, it'll be a zip file. That zip file was intended to, upload that to Microsoft, but you can crack that sucker open and start doing some of that yourself. And so I'll do just a real quick demo of the output. So in these results, you can see it pulled the event logs from my management servers and SQL servers. It pulls all the sealed management packs in XML format, so I can search through and find references. It pulls the unsealed management packs, so I can figure out, well, what's the customer doing? What custom management packs have they written? What customizations and overrides have they made? I basically get to see everything. The other thing is the CSVs. So it pulls a lot of the queries that I've published on my blog have gone into this tool, and it pulls and says, oh, look for config churn, look for all the monitors with a critical state, check on the aggregation history and status of the data warehouse. There's lots of health information that's pumped into one place, and using this, we can identify issues really, really quickly. But from today's perspective in health, like I was looking at like things like noise, too many alerts, too many events collected, too many perf. You can use this tool very quickly to just open these CSVs up in Excel, and you'll be able to see, okay, is my alerts per day, extreme or not? This is a lab, obviously, it's really, really small, but this tool gives you quick access to a lot of that without going and running individual queries, individual PowerShells, collecting the event logs manually. It really saves time for SCOM administrators. So just be aware that that's out there. That's some tool that you can add to your toolbox, and I'll reference it a little bit today as we go through this exercise. All right. So on to the topics. I have about 15 of the most common issues that we see still happening in new deployments, existing and old deployments. Database sizing. So the best practices for the operations manager database, not the data warehouse, it's a little bit different, is to pre-size this with lots of free space. I generally don't do anything. Like when you install SCOM, it's 1 gig. Right. And it's got auto grow enabled with whatever the SQL default configuration is. I don't recommend that. So I'll go in and, if it's going to be based on the expectations of the agent count for this customer, I'll do a 30 gig for really small environments. I'll do 100 gig for large production environments. Then I'll set the log to 50% of the DB size. I still see a lot of DBAs come in and they'll see all this free space in the log and they'll shrink it. And that is not a best practice. You want you don't want the ops DB to constantly be growing in these small fragmented growths. You want to just pre-size it. We know we're going to need it. Keep your DBAs away from the SCOM databases and set these to some best practices. Now, what's changed is always on. Initially, we always ran in simple recovery model. There was no reason to do transaction log backups throughout the day. It was way more stable because you never had to worry about your T-log filling up. But with the advent of always on requires to be in full recovery model. And so what that means for SCOM is we need to plan for a much, much bigger transaction log. And so I'll still see customers do, like a 200 gig database volume, 100 gig log volume. And that's not going to work for always on because because always on requires full recovery model, you want to be able to make sure that if a transaction log backup fails for any reason, it doesn't immediately crash SCOM, right? So it's not uncommon for me to have like a 100 gig production database for a customer and a 300 gig transaction log. Because I want to know that I've got multiple hours, if not at least a day, worth of space to accommodate all the transactions that are occurring before the SQL team gets the problem with the transaction log backups fixed, whatever that may be. So if you want to reduce your outages, you want to plan for a T-log that can be a lot bigger. And again, this is where if you're using full recovery, you do want auto growth. But the problem when I see customers enable auto growth is they don't put a limit. And so they just let it fill the disk. And we never want to fill the disk on a SQL server. So I'll go look at the volume size that's been allocated, and I'll always set a limit in SQL to be 80% of the volume size. The second part of auto growth is we don't want the default growths. Like some of the default growths in SCOM are like 10% or 10 megabyte. I'm sorry, in SQL. And I'll my rule of thumb is to do 500 meg for the transaction log and a gig in a growth for the database file. That's not hard and fast. You know, if your SQL team has a standard that is good, but not exactly that number, that's totally fine, right? But you need to not ever have the SQL defaults, because the SQL defaults are terrible. They'll fill your disk and they'll have tons of fragmented growths. So something to think about and watch out for. The operations manager DW, you know, same kind of concept, pre-size it, get lots of free space. We don't want a lot of small growths, but we do use auto grow on the data warehouse database. Again, same kind of rules of thumb, 80% volume size limits for the database and the log, and set your growths to be, you know, a gig or so for the database file and 500 meg or so for the log. And the sizing for the transaction log for the data warehouse is not like the OpsDB. It's not 50%. So my rule of thumb when I'm setting one up initially is I'll just pre-size it to about 10%, and I'll let auto grow take care of it from that point forward. Next up is daily reindexes. So I've written about this, but I've still seen a lot of customers not doing it yet. And so if you don't set up a daily reindex of the OpsDB, there is a known issue starting with SQL 2016 and later, which everybody should be on now. And that issue is the unused space. Because of the way we do bulk inserts for event and performance data, we will fill the OpsDB. And I mean, it consumes a ton of space. So when I go into a customer environment and their OpsDB is getting full, most of the time it's because they haven't set up their daily reindexes. And the reindex of these tables shrinks and gets rid of all that unused space. It also makes querying and daily operations more efficient. So there isn't a good reason not to set this up. Ultimately, I usually recommend Ola Hologren's solution. And I've got a link here in the deck that takes you to kind of a recommendation and links to where you can go download the daily reindex stuff. I didn't link it in this deck, but I forgot I have a step-by-step of how to set up daily reindexes. You know, if you've got a SQL team, just tell them, hey, I need daily reindexes of the OpsDB. If you don't have a SQL team and you own your SQL server, I do have a step-by-step on my blog in a SQL Always On blog post. So you can search for that and find it. Another issue we find is management server locations. So a lot of customers, you know, if they had 3 data centers, they would put a management server at each data center. And that is absolutely not the right thing to do. And so you want all your management servers and all your SQL servers in the same network location. There are some exceptions to this, like some of the customers I work with have a DR data center that's like 10 miles away and it's 3 milliseconds apart. Well, in cases like that, it's fine to spread those out for the purposes of DR. Some customers have a DR data center dedicated for DR. If that's high latency, you have to be really careful about your planning for how you're going to accomplish DR if you have a high latency connection. So, again, management servers and SQL servers to each other and to the databases should be less than 5 milliseconds optimally in all cases. And if you want to know more, I've got a link here to a YouTube. This was my last Silec MPU where I did an entire session on designing SCOM for disasters. And it goes into all of these topics at great detail. So yeah, something just to think about and watch out for. And if you've inherited an environment with management servers across different data centers, that could be why you've got some stability issues from time to time. Another real common issue is the registry isn't optimized. Now, I don't know why we still have to set these in reg keys. I don't know why they're not the software defaults anymore, but they're not, even in SCOM 2022. And so I have a blog post where I recommend some very specific reg keys get set for. The most critical one is the database reconnect. A SCOM out of the box, if the database gets disconnected due to a network outage or a failover or anything, sometimes it will not reconnect, and SCOM is just dead at that point. And even though the database is back up, maybe you just patch the database server and rebooted it. That's all it takes. And so with this reg key set, it's going to keep trying to reconnect to the database until the cows come home, basically. So I do recommend these settings. Another issue that we see is over permission service accounts. When for some reason, when people deployed SCOM, they thought the management server action account needed to be a domain admin, and that is not the case. We never want high permissions for any SCOM service accounts. The other problem I see is a lot of customers put their management server action account as having local administrator on every agent in the company. That is really, really bad. It's almost as bad as making it a domain admin. And the reason is that makes it easy for you to go deploy agents because you can just push them using that built-in account. But that puts your entire organization at serious risk, because we have seen where customers, that management server action account was compromised by an outside attacker, and SCOM service accounts were used to gain access to all of the keys in the kingdom. And you don't want to be responsible for that. You don't want that coming back on you as the SCOM admin. So I strongly recommend this. And then the other thing is, we see customers would have some problem and they would just go make all the service accounts sysadmin in SQL to try to solve that problem. And that's not right. I publish documents on the proper permissions for lowest priv called the security matrix. And that's the reason I do that, is so here's the standard. This is the way it's supposed to be. And I do recommend you adhere to that. All right, SCOM admin security. So when you install SCOM, a lot of people fix this, but then they deployed a new version of SCOM or they did an upgrade and they got back into poor security. So when you install SCOM, the default is that built-in /administrators will be present as a SCOM admin, right? And the reason they do that by default is because until you go in and put your SCOM admins global group, it needs to make sure that the person who did the install will have access to SCOM, right? And including the service accounts and things like that. So one of the first things you do because it's scary to remove this, after you've been in production a year, because what if your service accounts or your user accounts aren't in a global group? It's easy to recover from, but you do want to make sure that you remove this built-in administrators, because what that does is that says anybody that is a local administrator on any SCOM server automatically has full rights, admin rights to SCOM. And that means that just because you're an admin on a SCOM server, you now could inject a management pack that impacts everybody in the entire company. And so we don't want to, over grant that permission. So this is one of the first things that I remove whenever we build a new SCOM instance. Easy to check for that. Another best practice. event logs. So the default event log when we deploy SCOM is 16 meg. And that's for management servers, gateways, agents, doesn't matter. It's 16 meg. On management servers, especially management servers, maybe gateways, that's way too small. The problem is that that log is so verbose on management servers that your event logs just roll. And so if you have a problem and you have to engage Microsoft support, or if you're just trying to troubleshoot it yourself, if you've only got 4 hours of logs on something that crashes once a day, you just shot yourself in the foot. So what I recommend is to set this somewhere between 60 and 100 meg on all your management servers. And it's just a manual process, right? And so later I'll demo some automation around this so you can detect it and fix it really quickly. Agent proxy is a default. I still see customers not setting this. I have no idea why. You're just making your life harder. I recommend setting that as a default setting in SCOM. I've got a blog post on it linked below. It's just a one-time set it and forget it. So when you deploy a new management group, I recommend setting this as one of the first things you do on day one. SCOM license keys. We still sometimes find customers hit that 180-day timeout because they were not aware that nobody applied the key when they first deployed SCOM. So it's something you definitely need to check. You need to make sure that yours is not sitting in eval mode because it will time bomb and it's ugly sometimes to try to recover from that. So I've got a blog post on the commands. We have a new way in SCOM 2022 where it's super easy to do this. You just do it in the console. So you just go to the help section in the console, put in your license key, and you're done. Next up is agents installed on management servers. This is still a problem sometimes. I don't even know how customers get into this situation because, like, if you try to do it manually, we block this, but I still find it all the time. So typically it's customers that have multiple management groups, and maybe they've got their test environment and their production environment, and somehow they will deploy an agent from one management group on a management server that's serving another management group. And that's bad because there's a lot of limits on the amount of memory and the amount of handles that a management server health service is allowed to use versus a agent. And when we see it as an agent, what that can do is that can put your management server in this restart loop. Because the agent rules for how much memory the health service or the monitoring host processes are allowed to use, they're too high for the default setting of that management group, and it just issues a recovery that says, "Oh, bounce this one, kill that process." And so you don't want that. So I don't recommend you cross monitor management servers from some other management group. Most of the time when we find it, customer didn't know. They didn't even know that they were doing it. It was one of those things that their automation tools forced it. Another issue that comes up a lot is resource pools not being optimized. So this mostly impacts big customers. If you've got the typical 2 to 3 management servers, you can ignore it. Whatever the default settings are just fine. But when customers get into bigger deployments where they've got 5 management servers or more, I have some that have 10 management servers, or when customers are doing that DR scenario where they've got a high latency connection, you've got to make changes to your resource pools. And so that may mean that your management servers in the DR location aren't members of the all management servers resource pool or the notifications resource pool, because if they're in that resource pool, they need to be 5 milliseconds away. The other scenario is if you've got resource, like one of my customers has 10 management servers or 12 management servers, just due to how much they're monitoring between their Windows footprint and their Linux footprint. And so those customers will often optimize their resource pools to say, okay, these 5 management servers are going to be reserved for the all management servers resource pool because 4 of them are for Unix and Linux, 2 of them are for URL and network. And so they'll define those. Well, there is something called the default observer on resource pools, and you will want to optimize that in scenarios like that. So if you're huge, this is really, really important. If you're, under 3,000 systems and you typically only have 2 to 3 management servers, no big deal. Don't worry about it. But if you want to know more, there's a blog link here that goes into deep dive with a lot of PowerShell examples and all that good stuff. All right. Noise and bloat. This has been a problem with SCOM since I started with Mom 2005, right? Where customers bring in every management pack there is. I was just working with a customer last week, and the guy inherited it. We opened up the console, and every Microsoft management pack that we've ever written was imported. And I was just like, this is going to fail. This is definitely going to fail. You need to bring in only the workflows and the management packs that are part of what your responsibility is to monitor, and what you have people that are willing to investigate the problem and solve the problem or tune the alerts. And so we see this a lot. I've written tons of blog posts over the years and lots of tools that we've added, but alerts, event, performance, state changes, instance bloat, all of those are, a real thing. So with that, that is one place where the data collector can really come in handy. So, I kind of showed, if you want to look at, alerts by repeat count, there's a CSV for that where you can just pull these right out and figure out, okay, what's having the biggest problem in my environment from alerts. We can go look at things like config churn. I mentioned that earlier. Performance data, event data, and then state change data. I don't know if that one worked here or not, but these CSVs are pulling a lot of that information. So it's important. Yeah, here we go. State by monitor in the past 7 days. So this one is kind of showing, okay, what monitors are creating the most state change noise. It's important to keep track of this because these monitors may not show up as alerts. You may not even be aware that this is happening. And what it's doing behind the scenes is it's just creating lots of impact on the SCOM databases. It's creating transactions for each one of these. And you're basically just overloading the SCOM environment without getting any value whatsoever. So a little bit of effort to identify these on like a quarterly basis is really worth the time investment. The other thing that I look at is how many instances. So I'll go to instances by type. And this is basically what have we discovered and what's the largest things consuming my instance space in SCOM. So here I've got Windows agent job or my Exchange health sets. That's good. That's healthy. That's normal. I would expect that. Usually I'll see something like network adapters or logical disk in customer environments being really high. But what to look for here is, what if it's something you wrote or somebody before you wrote? What if it's some custom management pack that discovered way too many objects, and that's actually creating some of the performance issues in SCOM? So if the top object from this query is something that has got your name on it, that's a problem. Almost guaranteed that's a problem. And so this is one of the first things I look at when I'm doing performance evaluations for a customer. And it's something that you can pull out as well. So it's just, you want to be knowledgeable about what's discovered in your environment and how many instances there are, and is there an opportunity to maybe optimize that? All right. Another really common issue is that the data warehouse retention is not set out of the box. I mean, this isn't really a health issue as much as it is a process and performance issue. But out of the box settings, we just kind of threw a dart and said 400 days. Let's keep 400 days. And I don't recommend that. I do think every customer should figure out what is right for them. and adjust these values. It by shrinking the data warehouse, you're reducing the cost of maintaining backups, the cost of how much space it uses on disk. You're reducing the time it takes to recover if you had to, move it to another server. If you just want, your nightly backups are faster with a smaller database. So it just makes sense not to assume that the defaults are right, and that you need to revisit this. So I've got a couple blog posts on this. There's also a great tool. I think I'm set up to show that. That Blake Drum, the author of the Data Collector, has also written a not here. Oh yeah, I've got a shortcut here. Yeah, so Blake Drum has written a warehouse tool. We've had a couple tools over the years, but this one is the best I've ever seen. It's really, really good. It makes it stupid easy. You run it on a managed server, it'll detect what your data warehouse is, and it will query the data warehouse and show you, here's all your data sets, here's what's using the most space, here's the current retention, and right here you can just, using the UI, you can change that retention to something that's right for you. So I definitely recommend you check that out, and you have a conversation with your team, with your management, and that you only keep data in SCOM that's necessary, especially if it's on-prem, because you're responsible for that, and you're just lowering your total cost of ownership. Okay, this is something I see in almost every non-mature customer that I run into. Well, I'll start to work with the customer, and I'll say, okay, where are your custom managed packs? Oh, they're over here. They're on the server. Well, where's your SCOM media? Oh, it's over here. Well, where's your update rollup files? Oh, we just download those and run them. And that's really a worse practice. It's bad because so many people try to save everything on the SCOM server. But then when you retire that SCOM server, you got to think about that, or if that VM collapses and you lose it and you can't recover it, you just lost all your history. And so it's really important. I recommend customers set up a file share that where they keep all their SCOM stuff in one place. And this is just an example that I advise customers on when they're new. Kind of create a folder for all your documentation, whether it's third-party documentation or documentation you write. Create a folder for the SCOM install media. Create a folder for the license keys, right? So that if you ever have an emergency and you're in a DR situation and you need to apply that license key, hey, just have it right here in a text file, right? So you're ready to go. Everything is in one place. You don't need to panic. Everything you need is right there. Management packs, right? This will be where you download and save all the third-party managed packs that you use, because if you're familiar with Microsoft, we love to pull those things, right? When we say, okay, we don't support this anymore, it's gone. You can't go back and get it, even though you still may need it for your environment, support it or not. So I always recommend customers build a repository of their own management packs, whether that's in-house developed, unsealed management packs, and the third-party management packs that you download. Keep it all in one place. If you're doing unsealed MP backups on a regular basis, which I have a management pack that does that, this is a great folder to dump that into, because there's one place where all of your data is. If you're doing sealing through Visual Studio or Select, it is critical that you don't lose that key. That key is everything to being able to continue sealing and update and upgrade MPs down the road. So I highly recommend you keep it in a central location that is backed up so that you always have access to it. If you use any custom scripts that you download from the web or that you develop yourself, this is a great place. Tools like MP Viewer, Override Creator, Select, whatever tools you want. This is a great folder. And then updates. All your UR updates should be in one place so that where they are. You can go reference them and download them. So this is kind of my best practice for that. And all of that leads us to the SCOM Health Management Pack. So I'm releasing this management pack today. You can go download it. It's on my GitHub. I'm still writing the blog post that describes it in great detail. But you can at least get it into a test environment and kick the tires and see what it bubbles up, right? So a lot of the topics I talked about today, like DB sizing, registry key optimizations, whether the license is installed, agent proxy, whether we're at default data warehouse retentions or not, whether the event logs are sized, if someone accidentally installed an agent, and resource pool observers. So the SCOM Health Manage Pack, it does all of that. It's got monitors for every one of those scenarios. So it will bubble up the health and tell you that. It also has some rules for things that I've run into over the years, like if the config file is old, that should say config file age on agents. So let's say you've got an agent. Normally an agent is going to get some type of updated config on at least a daily basis, right? And if we go like 10 days without getting any updates, something's broken on that agent. It's not getting config. It may still be working and communicating, but it is not getting config. And we need to know that. We need to know when an agent's not getting config for some reason. So when that config file gets over a certain threshold, and you can adjust this in your environment, this will generate an alert and let you know. The other thing that we saw is I had a customer that had like 3 agents out of 10,000 where the health service store ballooned up to like 5 gig and filled the C drive. And it was crazy. We don't really know why that happened. We flushed the cache, deleted that file, and the problem hasn't come back on that specific machine. But from time to time, they still see it. So the health service store size collection is something I wrote to actually collect that data, and you'll be able to identify systems that have a really, really bloated health service store, and you'll want to go fix that. And I included a task to do a defrag, which is a way to shrink that size, right? You can do that, or you can just flush the cache. And then I put recovery tasks in here. They're not enabled by default, but you can trigger them, and I'll show you that in the demo, where you can go and fix some of these problems. So with that, I'm going to kick over to my SCOM environment. And so if I come down here to management group health, I can see that I'm just going to do a quick refresh. Whoops. My database has problems, my management servers has problems, and all of this rolls up to the management group object. So I'm going to run Health Explorer against this. And I'm like, whoa, I've got a sea of yellow. So it's, I can see my data warehouse registry is not optimized. I put in product knowledge that kind of explains, why this reg key needs to exist, what we recommend, what the default value is in code, and why we're changing it. And then any link. Oh, I need to update these links. They're still going to my old TechNet blog. So you can see this has been around a long time, right? Because everything's on kevinholman.com now. So that's funny. So there will be a rev of this. So if you download it today, maybe check back in a couple days, because I'm going to update some of these links so they point to the right places. But within this, I can see that this particular management server, OM2, is missing this reg key. Where this is really helpful is maybe you've optimized all your management servers already and everything's great. I had a customer that did optimize all their management servers, but then later on they added 2 management servers and they forgot. And they had customized some settings for resource pools that caused their resource pools to unload. And had they had this managed, in fact, that was, I think, the initial driver for this MP, was to detect for that condition so it didn't happen again. So within this, I can go into the state change event, and you'll see there is a built-in recovery. And what this recovery will do is it will run and set the reg value correctly. So the next time that the schedule, I think these only run like once every 4 hours, will detect that reg key is present now, and this problem will go away. I can do the same thing with event logs. So I can see that this is looking at an event log is currently, 16 megabytes. That's too small. I set a minimum size of 60 meg. So if you don't want to do it manually, you can just enable this recovery, and it automatically went out and set the operations manager log on this management server, only this one, to 60 meg. So the problem is now fixed. And so again, I can just kind of go through and fix every one of these problems just using this management packet that exists. Yep. All right. So that covers like reg keys and the event log size. Let's talk about some other scenarios that we're monitoring. So in this case, the OpsDB and the log size monitor was detected. It can see that, my database size is only set to 6 gig. And I've just set a minimum size threshold of 30 gig for the OpsDB and 15 gig for the log. So this will detect maybe the SQL team keeps shrinking my transaction log and I want to know when that happens. Great tool to detect that, right? Centrally, you'll know it as soon as it happens. So these are also overridable, or you can just go in and change the properties for your environment. So I think, so I've set this to 50 gig and 25 gig as the minimum size. You may want to adjust that because you may have a lab that you only have a 10 gig OpsDB, and that's fine, right? So when you bring this into your lab, maybe you'll, maybe you blow up the database to 50 and 25 to solve the problem, or maybe you just change the values that we're monitoring for it to what's realistic for your environment. But you can change all of these. And let's see. This is the data warehouse registry stuff. Oh yeah, and there's a couple more in here. So agent proxy. So in this environment, I do not have agent proxy enabled. This detects that condition. I don't have a recovery for setting it. I totally could build one. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe that'll be another, 1.3. So that will detect when that's not set. Like if you build a new management group, this is a great manage pack just to bring in immediately because it will help remind you all the little optimizations that you need to do. And then also SCOM admins, right? This one detects if built-in /administrators exists in your SCOM admins user role. If it does, we're gonna trigger that. I don't have a recovery for that because that's a really kind of a important decision to make when you're making that change. So I wouldn't necessarily automate something like that, but the pack certainly can do that for you. And all of these translate into alerts, right? So everyone's used to these agent proxy not enabled. But if you just want to search for SCOM health, all of the alerts, I don't know what happened to my caps lock. All of these kind of bubble up under the SCOM health header. So the agent proxy checks, the OpsDB, the registry settings, all of that. Now, as you fix these with the recoveries, the monitors, when they redetect, it'll auto close and the alert will go away. All right. And so, like I said, that is available on my GitHub. So I think I put the link, in the deck. Here we go. Yep. So if you just go to my normal location for GitHub, you can see the SCOM Health is the latest one that's published. So here's GitHub, and that's my pretty face. Here we go. SCOM Health, right? So just uploaded it this morning, but it's available for download. I anticipate as more customers start to use this and I get more feedback, I'll be putting a lot more stuff in it. I am planning, the one thing that I'm working on right now is Snapshot. A lot of customers, especially larger ones, have problems with Snapshot config failing. And the way we monitor out of the box for that, it kind of stinks. It doesn't reset properly. So I'm going to rewrite a new snapshot monitor that does a much better job of determining when snapshot fails. And I'll automate a recovery to say, okay, if we've gone like 3 hours and we still haven't had a successful snapshot, go ahead and kick off snapshot again. So that'll be an enhancement that'll be coming to this. And so that's all that I have. So I guess I think we're right on time for questions.